Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our Soulcast Media live event. I am so excited to be hosting today's episode, which we are doing something super special. We are celebrating the anniversary of my book, Smart Not Loud: How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons, coming out. I cannot believe it's been a year. I feel like all the work behind the scenes of writing the book, promoting the book, publishing the book, and then talking about the book, I'm just like, wow, has it already been a year? And it's just like, wow, it's just amazing. So, first of all, I want to say I'm thrilled that you're here. If you are joining us and me for the very first time, I want to say welcome. We put together the Soulcast Media live events every so often. And really, my goal and my hope for these events is to help you elevate your communication skills. So that's the work that I do here at Soulcast Media. But in addition to training folks, I do a lot of speaking as well, where I go into these big corporate conferences and events, and I do a lot of motivational speaking to inspire teams to think about how they can better communicate to really drive business results. So, in addition to that, for those of you who don't know, I'm also a mom. I have two young kids. So, life is just fun and busy. But today we're celebrating. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up my colleague. Her name is Maria. You might kind of know her because she's been on here before. And I'm going to bring up Maria because she is really the person who is behind the scenes with me. So, hey, Maria.
Hi, Jessica. How's it going?
Good. So I just want folks to just, be a part of this celebration with us. And with us, I really mean it as, Maria, you've been with me for years now, and you've really been
Yes.
kind of driving a lot of the behind the scenes stuff of getting this book out there, the messaging, the marketing. I mean, for those of you who don't know or who see our social media, Maria is the one that's really handling this. But, I want this just to be a conversation of us reflecting on this book, some key like learning points from the book. So yeah, let's just chat about it.
Yeah. I've been with Jessica for 4 years now, a little over 4 years. And I have to say, so this is behind the scenes, right? So we can dive in, give a little some, little nuggets, truth
Mhm.
bombs, maybe. When I first started with Jessica is when she told me that she was writing a book. And I was like, wow. So, I had no idea what that entailed. And then 4 years later, I guess really 3 years after I started is when the book actually came out.
Mhm.
So, there's just been a lot of back and forth trying to figure out how the book was going to be. Jessica doesn't talk a lot about this, but it was a book that she just advocated for herself so hard, and like getting a publisher was just so exciting. Her and I had so many conversations about just the ins and outs of like finding a publisher
Mhm.
and getting your manuscript out there and all those things. And so it's been really exciting to see it kind of from I've almost been from the beginning, I guess, of this journey.
No, really, and it's funny you bring that up because, and you might remember this, Maria, but when I first started writing this book, I was going to actually self-publish. So in
Hmm.
publishing, there are different ways you can go about publishing a book. You can self-publish, or you can go the traditional route, which is to get a publisher. And because we're kind of talking about the book today in a more casual way, it's interesting because I will be honest, I was not very confident when I wanted to start writing this book. I was like, I have this idea. I'm passionate about this idea, but will a big publisher be interested in publishing this book? And I almost, in many ways, told myself, no, they wouldn't. So I'm just going to do it myself, right? So in many ways, I credit the ambition, the self ambition of being like, okay, fine. If nobody wants to represent me, I'm just going to do it myself, right? So I'm like, I'm going to do it regardless. So, and I did. And I actually finished writing the book before I even thought about going the traditional route. And what ended up happening, and I'm happy to share the story, was when you self-publish, you actually have to hire your own people, your own editors to review the manuscript. And because I had to do that, I had to go literally, and I did this on LinkedIn, folks. So, by the way, LinkedIn is also a great place to do this. I ended up just finding like somebody who used to work at a big publishing firm who is now, I believe, retired. And I was like, hey, would you be willing to review my manuscript? And she looked at it and she was like, Jessica, you have to go traditional. You have to find a big publisher to do this. And it was almost like this like spark inside of me where like, not that I needed the validation because I think there's something to be said about self-motivation, but it was just like, yeah, that person gave me that confidence of like, maybe I can go the traditional route. And then once that spark of idea came, then it was like, well, what do I do? How do you go and how do you find a publisher? Which is about, you have to get an agent, you have to send a proposal, and then, you kind of start shopping it around. But, talking about this book, it's like, yeah, I really was just gonna do the traditional, I mean, the self-publishing route, but something about going traditional, which ended up being published by Penguin Random House, which is like the biggest publisher in the world. That whole experience was pretty awesome in and of itself. And you've been with me the whole time.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, when you were able to get, not that you needed the validation because you knew you had a good idea, like Soulcast Media has, I mean, you have over 2 million learners on LinkedIn. Like, that people resonate and they are interested and want to level up their communication skills. But just having somebody who's like been in the industry and knows like a really good idea, definitely, I think just makes you be like, okay, I'm onto something real. Like, this is legit. I can then take the next step and like really put myself out there, which I think helped tremendously. Cause I don't know, do you think you would have done the LinkedIn, like, hey, does anybody know of anybody that works at these different places? Would you have done that had you not gotten that like validation, that spark from the other person?
It's interesting because in my work, I talk a lot about rejection and how do you deal with somebody saying no to you, right? And it's interesting because I feel like no matter what, no matter how quote unquote confident you can feel, like rejection still sucks, right? And I think what ended up happening with that was, so I did, because I was initially going to go self-publishing, I had to find my own person. So I did reach out to a bunch of people to see, like, hey, would you be willing? And of course, it was like a paid thing. Like, I pay you to read my manuscript, to edit it, to make it sound nice, make my grammar sound great, all that kind of stuff. But if this person had never suggested that, would I have gone traditional just because I like wanted to try? I don't know, because there's nothing wrong with self-publishing either. Like, there's like self-publishing means you kind of do it all yourself and you have full autonomy and control over your work. The thing with traditional basically means, of course, you have all the manpower behind you. You have the network, you have the distribution of the book, which in many ways could help you reach a bigger audience. So I think at the end of the day, if I never got that validation, would I have still gone down the self-publishing route? I probably actually would have. I probably would have just been like, let's just keep rolling, right? Let's just keep going, because there is something to be said about just doing it, right? And not necessarily waiting for something to come along. Because if I had, let's say, been like, oh, I'm so adamant about wanting to go quote unquote traditional, and let's say people were like, the process was taking forever. There's something to be said about just getting the stuff done, right? And I
Yeah.
think like once you can get published, whether it's the first way or the second way, once the work is out there, then I feel like that's when you can kind of get stuff going, right? So I think I think back to folks who are like listening to this, and it's kind of like, yes, validation is nice. Yes, it's nice if like a big quote unquote contract lands on your desk in that sense. But even if it doesn't, like, just continue doing it, And I don't feel like you would have any regrets in that sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's so true. I mean, what is always the thing that people say? It's like, just start, just go. Like, you can't wait for it to be perfect. You can't wait for it to be, what your like full vision is. If you can just get going, you'll get there. And
Mhm.
even if you had self-published, I'm sure at some point it maybe would have been picked up by a major publisher. Like, you just never know. But I'm glad that it worked out the way it did.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, Maria, because I know you were kind of doing a lot of this. Was there anything about the book process, any part of the book process that surprised you?
Okay, I was very surprised about just like the marketing aspect of it, of just like the self ownership of the marketing, and how, Jessica and I we have meetings all the time of just like, how are we going to market this book? And so I was really surprised by that. And then also, so I did a lot of stuff. I remember when you'd gotten some like edits from the editor, and just like how particular the edits were, of just because, like, I mean, I'm sure everyone in the audience knows, Jessica was a journalist first, and then kind of transitioned into the communications world, and doing what she does now. And so she's an excellent writer. Like, I also went to journalism school, but I did like the TV editing or the TV part. I didn't do the writing because perfect grammar scares me. And so, but Jessica is like perfect at her grammar and editing. And so it was so much more than I had ever would have anticipated, which I think, so that was the question I was going to ask you is, like, when we're talking about, like, sometimes like rejection and stuff like that. And like, when you are putting your heart and soul kind of like on a platter and giving it to someone, and then they come back and they're like, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. Like, how did that make you feel? Because when I was reading the edits, I was like, okay, hold on.
Like, that was rude. No.
I know. I was like, hey, that sounds fine to me.
It's funny because when you work with an editor in this sense, it's very much a partnership and it's a collaboration, right? And I think, like, when you decide on what editor or which editor to work with, in many ways, like, you are trusting their judgment too. And I love my editor. I don't know if my editor Megan is listening to this, but I trust everything that she says. And like, part of like working with an organization like that is like, you want to hear the feedback, you want to hear their critiques, you want to hear it in an ugly way, right? And I remember, like, there were parts where she was like, Jessica, that doesn't make sense, or it's contradictory. And I think it's fair because as a writer, and it's weird to even call myself that because I don't consider myself a writer in that sense, but I guess I wrote the books. I guess I can say I'm a writer. As a writer, it's a very lonely process too, because you are just in your head and you're just staring at a blank white Word document. And all these like thoughts and words are just flowing out of your head. And you're like, I don't know if it makes sense. I don't even know if it's coherent. But actually, that's what they tell you. They tell you to just put it all on paper. It doesn't have to make sense. But the idea is you just start and you just kind of like, what's that? Like, I don't know what that word is, but they just let it all tumble out in that sense, right? And so like
Like
when you
brain
put,
dumping.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Brain dump it all.
brain dumping it all and stuff. And so like, it's only from there that once you have words on paper, then you can start to craft and refine its messaging. So, when the editor is like coming back and saying like, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, it's like, okay, no, I believe you because it was truly just brain dumping. And what I did find the most enlightening about the process is, so when you work with them, you're having a lot of meetings talking about the concepts of the book. So the concepts of the book is this quiet culture, loud culture dynamic, which is what I start the book with, which is, if you grew up in a quiet culture, it's sometimes very hard for you to build visibility in a loud culture, which, in what I argue, is in a lot of workplaces. You have to be speaking up, you have to be loud, you have to be extroverted, which I feel like for many of us, including myself, that's not a very natural way of being, right? So to even talk about it and even categorize it as quiet culture, loud culture, let me tell you folks, like, that actually wasn't even like, there's no such term as quiet culture, loud culture before the book came out. But it was a thinking process between me and my publishers of like, what do we want to call it, right? What do we want to label it so people can easily understand this concept? And I remember it was several meetings with them of like, what do we call this thing, right? And I think bucketing it into quiet culture, loud culture, instantly I was like, brilliant. Like, that's actually like how I would describe it. And now it feels like it rolls off the tongue very nicely because I do think it embodies what I mean by that. And then, of course, that's the foundation of the book. And then we talk about the career tips, the communication tips later on. But I think that process was really fun for me because it's like you're creating vocabulary that wasn't there before.
Which is crazy because maybe it's because I've been in it so long. I was like, that didn't seem new because I feel like I feel I feel like the work that you had done, that I had worked on previous, was like all leading up to that. And so when I read it, it just was like, oh yes. It wasn't like, whoa, that doesn't make sense. It's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. So
Mhm.
it's funny coming from your perspective of like, oh, this is like new language. And I was like, is it though? Because I feel like I've been in it for so long, but you're right. It is. But
Yeah.
I've just been in it. So
Here's a fun little fact. So when we were deciding on the book title, so it's called Smart Not Loud now, but that actually wasn't what it was called before. When I had submitted my book, and this was actually when I was self-publishing it, I already had a title, which was not the title today. The title of that book was actually called Quiet Capital. That was the title. I don't know if you remember that, Maria.
I do. Now that you say it, I remember it. Yes, I do remember that.
That was what I was gonna name the book. It was gonna be maybe like Building Your Quiet Capital, or maybe it was just gonna be Quiet Capital, and the subtitle was gonna be something else. And I will tell you, this was something that I kind of went head to head with my publisher on because they didn't actually like that title.
Mm.
And it was hard because I wanted that title. There's something about building quiet capital that I was like, ooh, sounds very like sexy in that sense, right? Like I
Yeah.
love it. But they were like, Jessica, like they were like, I feel like people who don't know you won't really get what that means. And so we ended up using that title as a section chapter in the book. So part 2 is called Building Your Quiet Capital, or oh no, sorry, it's called Your Quiet Capital Framework. But yeah, it's funny because like that was something that started out in the beginning of the book. It was called Quiet Capital, but in the process of working with a publisher, you kind of change it a little bit. But initially, I will say I was a little sad. I was like, oh, I really like that. But at the end of the day, I think Smart Not Loud was it's a more like easy thing to say. And I think like I'm talking to a specific audience, people who I consider smart, but you do not consider yourself the loud type. And I wanted people to pick up the book and immediately say, hey, this is me. I do want to get noticed for the right reason. So that was a change I was eventually happy to make.
Yeah, no, I think it totally makes sense. I mean, the title tells you who you are talking to right away, and you get it. I want to
Mhm.
know from you. So I know for myself the most overwhelming part of all of this, and you're gonna laugh because you probably have no idea because I've never ever said it. But so I want to know from you what the most overwhelming part of the whole process was, and I'll tell you for me, and it wasn't the marketing, it was doing the citations. I was stressed beyond belief.
Really?
Oh yeah, because like I said, I did journalism school, but I did the, like on camera journalism. I did not do so citations and like the correct way to like cite something. I mean, I took journalism law. And so I remember doing all those citations, but it's been a while since I've been in college. And so, I was just like, I am so worried that I'm going to get this wrong and it's going to be published.
And then like,
It stressed me out. So I would like, and it was, and all the citations are really tiny too. So you're like real close to your computer, like making sure. Um, anyway, so that is what stressed me out the most, or the most overwhelming.
oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah, the marketing. I mean, like it was a lot, but it wasn't stress in that same way. But I want to know from you what was like the most overwhelming part of all of it.
Wait, I love that you just told me that because I had no idea that that stressed you out.
Oh my gosh. I was like Googling like the correct, it was just like, how do I specifically do this type of citation? Because there's a lot of different, whether it was a blog post is different than a news article and then like an online news article, so.
That's so funny. You're right. I almost completely forgot that I had you help with the citation. I basically was like, Maria, here's my manuscript. Can you
Yeah.
please cite it?
And I was like, yes, I can. And then I was like, I need to Google this.
Which, by the way, your citations are now published in the book, like in the back. You know that, right? Like,
Yes, yes.
you're like,
Stress.
that's my work. Like, I did that citation. Yeah, like so yeah, because we did a lot of research, a lot of the statistics, a lot of the stuff, we pulled from material that like studies have shown this or that.
Right.
They need to be cited. Oh my goodness, Maria, that's so funny. I don't blame you. That part is very stressful, but your citation is what makes the book, research backed as
Right.
well. So I appreciate your effort and hopefully you didn't lose too much sleep
No,
over
no.
that. What was overwhelming? Um, I think what's overwhelming or what was overwhelming in the book writing process is you have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts of like, what I want to say, but just because you have thoughts, it doesn't mean it comes out the way you want it to because if you can remember back to like when we were all in like English class and you had to write papers, it actually is kind of similar. Like you have a topic, you need to put it down, but you also need the evidence to like back up your claim, right? And it's like, how do you put it into these beautiful words and how do you put it into a nice storytelling way, right? And I didn't study. So unlike you, Maria, I didn't study journalism. That wasn't my major. Like, and I will tell you, like, I was probably a B student in writing. Like, I think back to in high school, because that's probably when I took writing. I didn't take any writing classes in college. Like, I think I was a solid B. Like, I was like a B in English class. I wasn't an A student where I could like put these beautiful words together. Like, I was just okay, you know? And so like when it came down to me having to like write it into a book, it's like you read these books and they're just so engaging. And I remember like I was like, should I hire a ghostwriter? Like a part of me was like, should I hire someone to do this for me? But there is something quite relaxing in being in that like quiet space in my office. That's where I wrote the book, in my office. Like I have like a big writing chair. So I have my desk and I have like a big writing chair, you know, across the room. And I would actually write my book on that, you know, sitting in that chair with my like feet propped up, the laptop on my lap. There's something really like peaceful, like journaling in that sense. But it's like, does this sound beautiful, right? Does it sound beautiful in that sense where you pick up a good book and it's like enjoyable to read? I feel like that overwhelmed me because I didn't know if it was good. Now, now that I look back and I have the book in my hand, like, you know, many of you have the book, I feel like it's very easy to read. I feel like I mean, I might be biased. I think it's enjoyable to read. But that wasn't always the case. And I think, yes, having a good editor helps too with that.
Yeah, I would think so too. I don't know. I feel like I have a lot of ideas in my head, but then like getting them down on paper is overwhelming. So an
Mhm.
entire book, I feel like I would freeze. Again, I was the on camera person. I was not the, I always struggled in English class of like the comma of like, and I would be like, where is the comma? And they'd be like, well, sometimes it's here. And I was like, is that this sometime? And they're like, I was like, that's not the answer I'm looking for.
Grammar is hard. Like I said, I think that's probably why I was a B student because I probably didn't get grammar right either.
Well, it seems like you always do. So I think you're maybe being too hard on yourself, but
Well, good thing there's like Chat GPT now and like all the things that can help you clarify your messaging.
yes, yes, I definitely need it. Okay, so is there anything? So we've talked about like like the ideas and all that kind of stuff. Lots of ideas, but is there anything? Because you said that Quiet Capital did not become the title, but is there anything that did not even make it into the book that you maybe had wished got into the book, or you just like you had to exit because it didn't quite fit the flow of what you were trying to talk about?
Oh, I do have a good one. So this made it into the book, and I want to explain like the thought process behind this story. So, in chapter 3 of the book, I talk about my mom. And for those of you who've read it, you will remember the story about how my mom was a stay-at-home mom for 20 some years and my parents got divorced and it forced my mom to go back to work. And this was not a story that I initially thought about putting in because number one, I don't really talk about like my personal life in that sense too much. I mean, you all know, like, I have a family, I have kids, and my mom is also a very private person. And like in that sense, where I was like, should I put my mom in the story? And the part of the story where she is in is where we talk about, how you have to almost be your own best advocate, how you have to be your own best cheerleader. And it felt like when I was thinking about to how I developed the confidence to be my own best cheerleader, a lot of it was looking at my mom herself because thinking about how somebody can go from not working, not being in the working environment for 20 some years, being a stay-at-home wife to, and by the way, my mom did not go to college. Like she only had like a high school education, was not born here in the US. English is not her first language. And then having to see her go back into the working world, struggle with that, right? Like even like turning, like using a computer, like my mom did not know how to use it. And my mom worked for the cosmetic brand Shiseido, and she was basically like one of the sales associates. So like having to engage with customers, put in their order, like even though that sounds so simple to a lot of us, like for somebody like my mom, who did not work for so long, like this was like learning a whole new language, like really. And I remember at that point I was already in college. Maybe I had just graduated college when my mom had to go back to work. But I remember like it was so scary for her, but I saw her willingness, I saw her like tenacity. It was almost like, well, I don't have a choice. I just got to figure it out, right? It's kind of this like figure it out mentality that I really appreciated about my mom, and I feel like that I wanted to put into the book to almost honor her in a way. Of course, I got her permission too. I'm like, hey, I'm going to put you in the book. And initially she was like, why? No, right? Because she's like such a private person. But like, I told her, and like, what's also amazing is this book is going to be translated into Chinese. I don't think it's out yet, but like eventually I want her to read, because she can't really read English in this sense, but like I want her to eventually read the Chinese version of this book and she can read her own story, because I do that. So going back to the question, this was a story that I wanted to put in, that initially it was like, does it make sense, does it not make sense, because this is like a career book. But I do think the sentiment of my mom is what I wanted to highlight in the book, because if my mom, who was like 50 something at that point, going back into the working world, which was scary. I think all of us can kind of like take some lessons from that we can all, no matter how scary it is, remember to be our own best cheerleader. And at the end of the day, we'll figure it out. And I think, as I said in the book, she did so well that she became the manager of her department. And she was like handling like all the sales and making all these six-figure sales. And it's just like crazy. Anyway, so it's a great story.
That's a really good story, and I'm glad that you were able to put it in the book, because I also think like it kind of shows who she was and who she instilled in you. Because if I'm sure most people are familiar with your story, and obviously you didn't start out having Soulcast and all the amazing like speaking engagements you do in the book and all that. You created it, I mean, out of nothing. It was you created it, and you took it to where it is and where it's going. And your mom, whether she realized it or not, was showing you can do this. And like you said, I don't care. I'm going to self-publish. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do, and you'll figure it out along the way. So that's really cool. I'm excited for her to get to read it.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because you mentioned this earlier, like when I transitioned from news to starting my own company. And I mean, I don't have all the answers. Like I do the best I can. And, my I guess my North Star is really trying to help people communicate better. And I feel like there's a need for it. I feel like there's something in this messaging that resonates with folks. And I think back to, there are a lot of communication resources out there, and initially there was this doubt of like, well, why should I create this? Because anybody can go and listen to the hundreds of other communication experts. But, I never found like there was somebody who was similar to me, who I really could feel like I could resonate with their message. So yeah, I started this company 7 years ago, and it was just simply me putting out content of, this is how to speak, this is how to do it well. If you struggle with it, I get it. If somebody makes you feel crappy, I get that too. I felt that way as well. But I think the fact that people keep coming back, people keep listening is, hopefully you can see that I relate to you, you relate to me, and we can grow together. And that's kind of like my hope really with this.
Yeah. And I always tell people who are like, oh, but there's always, somebody else doing this. And like, what about me? It's like that imposter syndrome. Like, what do I have to offer? And I would always tell people, like, how many songs are written about love? Is there only one song written about love, or are there like probably hundreds of thousands, right? But all of them are different, and they're all coming from a different perspective and a different artist and a different rhythm and a beat and all that. And every single one of them can be enjoyed. So why not you? Why not your perspective? Because you're the only you that there is, and you have a unique perspective. I mean, you coming from news gives you a different perspective on how to talk to people about being in front of cameras and, negotiating with your boss, and just all these different aspects of communication that your unique circumstances, your unique upbringing give you that perspective that other people can relate to. So yeah, why not you?
And why not for any of us who are listening?
Yeah.
Like, why not you, right? Like, why not you be the one to pitch that project? Why not you be the one to say that idea in the meeting? Why let somebody else say it, right? I think because all our listeners and the people who are watching, I consider you all so smart, so hardworking, like brilliant, but it's sometimes we just hold ourselves back, right? And I think like this is a reminder, like, yeah, why not you, right? The person who's saying that one thing doesn't make them smarter than you. It's just like they're just saying it first, but your idea might be even more brilliant, right? And so it's just, you just have to believe in yourself in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so we're kind of talking about that. What is one thing you would tell your younger, quieter self about, communication, getting visible in the workplace? Just what is one golden nugget from Jessica that she would love to have told her younger self, for those listeners who are maybe you are, kind of stuck where you are, you don't know how to make the next step. What is something maybe you would tell them or yourself?
Mm. This is the advice that I would give my kids one day when they start working, okay? Because I know as a parent, of course, I'm going to encourage them to study hard, to, be focused. Like that is of course incredibly important, and I would try to give them all those resources and support that I can so that they do good well and they do good well. They do well in school, right? That's important, but equally as important, I would want to emphasize, and this is the missing part that I feel a lot of people forget, is I do think it's important for them to learn how to communicate and learn how to like build influence around people. I think that is something that is missing. I wasn't taught that part of it. But for those of you who've ever attended my workshops or heard me speak, I always say there's these two sides to us. It's number one, it's our ability to execute, right? It's our ability to do the work and do it well. But the other part is, what do people see? What do people hear? Right. And I think that is learning those skills of how do you influence people? How do you like network with people? How do you talk about yourself so that you sound interesting? Right. How do you build common ground with people? And these are things that are learnable. And I talk about it all the time here on this event, on our podcast. Like, and there's so many tactical things that you all can just go and Google and learn. And, it's all out there. But I think that oftentimes is like the missing piece, and that I feel like if you can do both, get the job done and know how to influence people, know how to like make friends, build rapport, right? Build influence. That is really what makes a difference in your career, regardless of what industry you're in. I think that's a very important key differentiator here.
Yeah, it's just one of those soft skills that people kind of overlook because they're so focused on the like execution part. But then there's that other part of like, yeah, how do you make people feel? Like when you're speaking with them, do they feel good after talking with you? Are they excited for you to join the conversation or to be in that group or to be leading that project? Or that are they not? And like you said, it's definitely a soft skill that is super important that you can learn if you don't feel like you're executing it very well now. But yeah, Jessica
Yeah.
has a lot of content because I have personally seen and supervised a lot of it,
All of it, really.
on the website, on her socials, on the podcast. It's everywhere. But
And
yeah,
actually, to that point, thinking about AI, because that's actually something that I'm talking a little bit more about, and how AI changes the work we do. But not only that, it changes how we communicate what we're doing, right? I think thinking about the way you articulate your value at work, the way people know you, the way people, your career brand, right? I think that becomes even more important because we know, like, it's already happening. We know AI is going to take away a lot of the tedious, easy, entry level work. And that's great. Like, we don't want to do that stuff, right? What we want to do is get smart about being more strategic in the work that we do. How are we able to work smarter, right? How are we able to talk about the big ideas that we have to drive business results? Like, I think this is the next level of communications. It's not just like, oh, doing the work, doing it well. It's about how do people know us? It's the building influence, where in the age of AI now becomes even more important. In fact, I think the World Economic Forum said building influence is going to be one of the most important skills, soft skills that you need to learn in this new age of AI, because AI can never build influence in that sense, right? They're like, the tech part of it. But you as a person, you as a human skill, that is what's going to differentiate you. I think that's very important.
yeah. I mean, and it goes straight back to what you were talking about before is, what we were both talking about is like, you are the only you. Why not you? Right. And like, if you aren't doing those things. Somebody else may, and but like AI can't be you. So everyone's unique, and they all have everyone has their own gifts and skills and things they can excel at and communicate with others. And you just have to believe it. Believe in yourself.
Yeah. If AI can do a lot of the tedious and even reasoning parts of it, it's up to you to communicate it to other people.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah. So, Jessica, we've kind of been talking about the book, but I think it's our time is slowly coming to an end. But I wanted to ask you one more question, just to give a little teaser to people. And that is, do you think you're going to be writing another book?
I think the short answer is yes. I do think there is probably another book in me, and it's so even scary for me to say. It's kind of like having another kid, right? You're like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And you have one and you forget how difficult it is, and you do it again. You're like, "Oh my god!" But I do think there is another book in me. I do think it's going to be communications related. I don't know what exactly it's going to be, but I think just like having another kid, you want to make sure you're gonna do it. You're gonna do it right, right? You're gonna have the time to invest in writing a quality book. I don't want to rush into it, and I want to make sure that the topic, whatever it is, I'm also in the mental space to actually, really dive into it. Because in many ways, when you sign on to do another book, you're signing on for months and months of deep diving research, and it's overwhelming, right? You're like where do you even start, right? So I am all about ideas. So if anybody actually has any book ideas, you can let me know. You know how to reach me. You can DM me on LinkedIn. You can email us. Let me know. I will say, I recently did a speaking engagement for the banking company Santander. I think that's how you say it. There's a little tinge to its name. And when I was doing the Q&A, I got so many questions about communicating to your kids. It was very fascinating because obviously I was there to talk about how do you communicate at work, but then people were like, how do I teach communications to my kids, because their face is just stuck on their phones and they're just on the internet all the time. They don't have those social skills. And it turned into a whole Q&A about kids. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
No, I think that's so smart and probably maybe a really good idea, because I think in the digital age, people are struggling to communicate with their children, and their children are struggling to communicate back. They don't have to do it like they used to have to do it, like when I was growing up. And so I think people might be craving an expert in communications to help walk them through, give them some strategies, give them some things they can do, maybe a workbook that they can use to, help communicate better with their children, and vice versa.
Yeah, and actually, to this one point, I had a conversation last week with a school principal, and I'm just going to share this quick anecdote because I think it's relevant. He was telling me that teachers now are struggling because when kids turn in a paper, they cannot tell if it was written by ChatGPT, for example, and you cannot fail a student just based on assumption, like, oh, I think you wrote, So then schools are now grappling with, then how do you make sure they're actually learning the material? You have them do the homework, but are they really learning it, or is ChatGPT just writing it for them? And so him and I were talking about how then a lot of it comes down to verbal communications. How do you get them to talk about it? So as teachers, how do you ask better questions so you can test their critical thinking skills? Mm-hmm. And then as students, how do you articulate what you quote unquote wrote so that you're proving that you're really retaining the subject or the topic, right? So I think even schools and thinking about education, I think it's changing in that sense, right? It's like we know AI is going to be part of our work, schools and teachers and students, it's going to be part of it, but how do you make sure they're learning? It all comes down to verbal communications in that sense.
Yeah.
So this is interesting.
That is interesting. And I feel like it brings it back to back in the day when we had to write our essays
The
in
blue
class.
book. The blue book. I think I saw this article saying the blue book is back because
it's back. Which makes sense. Or you had to give a verbal presentation right? Which
Mhm.
is like the communications and the public speaking, and it's never going away. Communications, whether AI comes or there's another technology, you still have to be able to communicate that you understand and you have the capacity to critically think about what you've just read, reading comprehension. And so, yeah, it's it's all about the communication.
Totally. Well, thanks so much for doing this with me, Maria. I hope for those of you who are listening, watching, again, this is a little bit of a more casual conversation, and I wanted it to be that way because typically we structure this as like communication tips, right? And we have all of that here, but I just wanted this to be a more like, chit chat of like, so you all can see like what we do behind the scenes. Yes, when we talk about the book, Maria, you're holding it right now. So yeah, for those of you who, of course, haven't gotten it, please like read it. It's great. And it's not only in hardcover, you can get an audio, ebook, it's all over. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's always fun to be on, and I just enjoy being able to talk about all the work that we do, and kind of give a little behind the scenes for people who, they see what we do and what you do, and it's very like buttoned up, but sometimes it's nice to just like get a little more casual and just kind of talk about like, yeah, what was super overwhelming? What was the citations? Who knew? Like, so it's just
Exactly.
fun.
Totally. So again, thank you all so much for listening to this conversation. And we put out these events, every so often, at least once a month at this point. But we can notify you of all our upcoming events if you go to our website, soulcastmedia.com/events. Go there and it'll give you kind of a page to RSVP so you stay up to date on all our events, all our workshops that we do. We do a lot of free workshops as well. For those of you who can see us, there's a QR code here, but otherwise, that website, soulcastmedia.com/events is the best place. And if you listened and, you want to stay connected, DM me as well. Let me know you like heard one of my episodes. I'd love to connect with you. I read all the messages. Other than that, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode. And again, thank you so much, Maria, as well.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone.